Excuse
they can
me,
be
I'm
very
calling an end to
irresponsible.
this issue. I'm sorry, I'm calling an end to this issue because
Madam
we
President?
have just a short amount of time. Mrs. Mayo?
What my concern tonight on this discussion is that you have the topic, District Response to the Public Records Act request of the Contra Costa Times, when we actually really haven't discussed this particular item in length, and instead your proposal is that the Board of Education vote to direct staff to review a particular board policy.
That's step one.
I think that is misleading to our public and the preparation of the document item. I think that should have been a separate document, a docket item that would say review of board policy XYZ, and then attach the board policy so that we could have the discussion and determination if we wanted that reviewed. We're having a discussion about board policy rather than the district's response to the Contra Costa Times at this particular point in time. So although I may be in favor of the study of the board policy and determining what other districts are doing, I'm not going to voice my support for this because I don't believe that the docket was prepared correctly.
Thank you. Again, this is simply to calendar this for a later meeting when we will come back and have a chance to review the policy.
You asked for a vote.
Excuse me, Mrs. Mayo. Yes, the vote is to direct staff to review policy. Then I would like to get to addressing the actual steps that we might take to address the Public Records Act request of the Contra Costa Times as a board and trying to honor some of the concerns expressed here. But I would ask that we take this first step because I think it's an important step as a board to determine that we would prefer to be able to review policy and take a stand that we would far rather want to act from the presumption of openness rather than simply ultra-conservative confidentiality. So I would ask at this time that we take a vote on this item and hopefully there's support to have staff go off and review this policy. So I'm going to call for the vote. I'm calling for the vote. Yes, Mrs. Mayo.
I would assert that this vote is out of order because it's not included on the agenda.
Okay, point not well taken.
As an action item.
It is related to the policy of public access to records.
This document says information.
It is related. It's okay to do a motion on an item, an information item, when it is not deciding policy. We are not deciding policy, we're asking to review policy. So I would proceed at this time with a voice vote on that because I would like to actually get to a resolution and board action on addressing the topic at hand.
Madam President, what is the motion? There's been a lot of discussion for Ms. Joseph. I'd like to clarify the motion.
I have it written down for her as well. I move that the board direct staff to review policy on public access to district records and come back at a later time with a recommended policy of openness, including clear criteria for determining records are confidential and acknowledging that the burden of proof rests with the district to prove records are confidential. This is a review of policy at a later time. So given that, I would call for the vote at
Madam
this time.
President, just with regard to your motion,
well, Mr.
it
Rowland,
might be
I'm
difficult.
calling for a vote.
Okay, it may be difficult
Mr.
to
Rowland,
establish
I'm
clear
calling for a
criteria
vote.
in a vote
And we
in
can
a
discuss
policy.
that.
Okay.
Staff can
Just trying to
discuss
help.
that. Thank you.
Staff can discuss it.
I'm not trying to define it. I'm trying to direct staff to do some review, and that's what they could help answer. Okay, because I'd like to get back to the topic at hand. This is one method for us as a board to make some choices about policy. So I would call for a voice vote at this time. Mrs. Mayo?
I vote no, and I would like the record to show that I believe this action item is out of order.
Thank you. Mrs. Oakes?
Yes.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes.
Mrs. Denler? Yes. And Ms. Hanson, yes. Thank you. The motion carries 4-1-0. I would like to go to, and Mrs. Mayo will probably want to call this out of order as well, but I'm going to ask that we get to the part of the Contra Costa Times Public Records Act request and that we try to address, and I had to give this some thought about how do we address the the need for Mrs. Mayo's concern about review of the documents, Mr. Rowland's, the concern about Mr. Rowland, his involvement in actually being the one to review these documents. And I dread doing this because I was not thrilled when we went to an outside attorney for cure and correct. I was not thrilled when I had to go to an outside attorney for the contract review. But I am actually going to ask, which I hate to do, and Mrs. Denler, it's spending money, and I hate doing this for something. But I'm going to ask that, that this board authorize the board president and vice president to select and hire outside counsel. And when I say outside counsel, I do not want to have outside counsel. It's an attorney or a firm not on the district's current list. We need to find somebody else. To give an objective second opinion. Mr. Rowland has given a first opinion, and it is the district's response whether it was appropriate or not for Mr. Rowland to handle this response. I personally do not believe it was appropriate for Mr. Rowland to handle the response to this Public Records Act request, given that he was asked to look at documents that involved his own contract. I personally do not believe that was appropriate. However, Mr. Rowland responded to Mr. Borenstein, and when Mr. Rowland responded to Mr. Borenstein, he responded with the district's response. That's the first opinion. So I'm asking that we get a second opinion. Unfortunately, it can't be Ms. Cooksey because she is in the district as well. So in order to really rise above this and get to a place where we really, truly want to address these concerns and be open about it, I'm asking that the board authorize the board president and vice president to select, and Mrs. Oakes doesn't even know about this, and hire outside counsel, an attorney or firm not on the district's current list, to give an objective second opinion on the confidentiality of all district records pertaining to the contract extensions for the 5 district administrators as they relate to Dan Borenstein's Public Records Act request. And I would ask if there's a second to support this motion to really give it an objective second opinion. I would ask that the board authorize the board president and vice president to select and hire outside counsel, which is an attorney or firm not on the district's current list, to give an objective second opinion on the confidentiality of all those district records that we haven't seen pertaining to the contract extensions for the 5 district administrators as they relate to Dan Borenstein's Public Records Act request. And I'm going to comment here on this. The reason I'm asking to do this is because then that way we would end up in closed session potentially, but we would go into closed session with somebody else who sat and reviewed and deemed these confidential. We don't have to worry that somehow, and you can argue this all you want, Mr. Rowland, that somehow Mr. Rowland had a vested interest in reviewing these documents. We have somebody who's totally unrelated to this, any of these doings, who can look through those documents, whatever those might be that we haven't seen, make some determinations, and take those confidential documents into closed session so that when the board goes into closed session, we are absolutely assured by an objective second opinion that those are confidential documents. That way the board can review those documents in closed session where it is appropriate to review them and make a decision around whether or not we want to release any of those in response to the Public Records Act request. And that's what I consider a far more appropriate way to kind of balance all the concerns. Mrs. Denler?
Sometimes when we put things sort of out for bid or out to do something, we have like a limit.
Can we also
Well, I
clarify
need a
something that's already been approved?
I need a second for, I'm sorry, but I'm actually asking the board to allow us to do this. So I'm actually making it as another motion so that we can go to part 2, which I see coming anyway, which is that closed session. If there are confidential documents and we can be told by an objective outside counsel, these are confidential documents. And then that way, when we go into closed session, the board can be assured we're not in violation of the Brown Act, that we are truly looking at confidential documents together and making choices as a board on whether or not those are relevant or helpful to release.
Second for discussion.
Thank
I
you,
move
since I've
to
already been
amend.
jabbering.
I move to amend by adding that the board approve the legal counsel selected by the president and vice president.